So my name is Steve. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Human Factors program here. Dr. Simons Rudolph is out of town, so I'm taking care of the lecture this afternoon, and then my colleague Bobby will take care of the lecture on Monday. For this chapter, it's on consciousness. So before we start, yeah. No, I will not be doing red hat or anything today. There's a whole, whatever, not red hat, top hat, yeah. My other friend works for Red Hat, so I get confused all the time. So before we kind of like dive in here, does anyone want to take a stab at just defining consciousness? Anyone? Yeah. Okay, so, hey guys, come on. You're all paying to be here, or your parents are, so let's... so he just said that consciousness is, what was it again?
So, is the brain being active, directed towards certain tasks or lines of thought?
Yeah, so the brain being active, directed towards certain tasks or lines of thought. That's a good one. Anyone else? Anyone? Awareness. Define consciousness in your own words. Being aware of your own thoughts. There's another word for that. It's called metacognition. Anyone else? All right. Let's dive into it. Cool. This isn't working. All right. So consciousness is a pretty big, broad term in psychology. Because of the nature of it, it's a pretty subjective thing that we talk about. It differs pretty greatly from person to person, as opposed to being objective, where there's one single thing that we all know to be true. And it kind of started, as you probably talked about Rene Descartes, beginning of this semester here. And his idea was dualism, and he thought that the mind and body were two separate entities, and that the mind was this beautiful soul that couldn't be measured, couldn't be observed or anything, and the body was the physical part that was just a vessel for the consciousness, basically. But the way the textbook defines it is it's a combination of a person's subjective experiences with the external world and their mental activity. And this is all due to their brain activity. Most psychologists actually reject Descartes' ideas about dualism. It's really hard to disentangle the physical from the mental in psychology, especially with neuroscience in modern times. We haven't really figured out all the way how the physicalness of the brain translates into these cognitive processes, these social interactions, these subjective experiences that we have all the time. We've made a lot of progress, but we're not 100% there just yet. And because of that, because of a lot of research that we've done, we know that there are levels of consciousness. I think your textbook mentions Terry Schiavo. You guys might be too young for that. I don't really know. That was a long time ago. She had brain damage, I believe, and she was in a vegetative state, and there was no brain activity. She was still alive, but there was no brain activity. She was unconscious, not able to process anything. But there was the Pistorius guy. I forget his first name. That's the Blade Runner. It's a different Pistorius, I believe. For those of you who don't know, Oscar Pistorius was the Paralympic athlete who had the blades for feet. The other guy, he was able to process information even though he, for the most part, seemed unconscious. He was able to make eye movements he couldn't move his head, he couldn't move his limbs, but he could make eye movements in response to questions or pieces of information. If you've ever been like reading and you read an entire paragraph and then realized that you didn't process a single word that you just read. That happens to me a lot. You were technically conscious, but you weren't paying attention. Perception gets affected by how much we're paying attention to things. If you're ever driving home and you just completely zoned out and don't remember the entire drive home, technically you're not consciously processing that whole thing. In human factors, we call that controlled versus automatic processing, but it doesn't matter to you guys. So just to get your brains flowing a little bit, why don't you guys turn to your partner or whoever you're sitting next to and just kind of talk about what times you've been conscious and unconscious. It's kind of a weird experience when you're awake but not conscious. So we're gonna take 5 minutes and then we'll come back to it. Let's reconvene here. Who wants to share any interesting experiences they found out or had? Anyone? Yeah.
We talked about when you're walking around campus and people are on their phone. a lot of the time it's like you're not really aware of like nature and the beauty of the day. You're kind of just like zoned into what's going on. You're not really conscious of your surroundings.
Yeah, when you're walking around campus on your phone, you're not consciously aware of your surroundings. People can run into you, or like things happen. So don't cross streets with your phones. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know if this one counts, but actually I'm unconsciously like accept different terms and conditions to install something, like regular physical law, to really make sense, like
Well, that's an interesting case. You could probably unconsciously just scroll through the entire end user license agreement, but you're making a conscious decision to not read it all. And that's how Facebook gets your data. Anyone else? No one else wants to share any interesting experiences they have with consciousness? All right, we'll move on. So there's a difference between consciousness and unconsciousness, obviously. You can be awake and sensing things, but you may not be perceiving them, per se. So that gets called subliminal perception, where you are presented with something that you're not actually consciously aware of, but it can still affect your behavior. It's kind of a weird concept, but you've probably seen advertisements that kind of try to manipulate you a little bit. You're kind of aware of that. There's actually been a lot of experiments with if you flash like color words at people really fast, so fast that they can't actually read what the color word is, they're faster when responding to a presented color. It's a pretty interesting phenomenon, actually. The reason we reject Descartes' dualist idea is that we can actually look at brain activity when that kind of thing happens. Descartes said the mind couldn't be measured, but nowadays we do it all the time. Neuroscientists measure brain activity. Psychologists such as myself, we measure a lot of cognitive processes. We measure attentional resources, working memory, things like that. And those are things that we can get at, maybe not like super directly, but we can get at them through powerful measurements. And we're starting to join the two together. I like to think of psychology as kind of being divided right now between software and hardware. Hardware is the neuroscience, software is the psychology. If you think about a computer, I like computers, I'm a nerd. But we can combine those two to explore how these subjective experiences physically manifest themselves in people. So, got a little another activity for you guys. Be kind of fun, I hope. So, if everyone on my left side, your right side, could close your eyes. Just trust me. I know like I'm new to you, but like just trust me. Okay, people on the right side. I'm going to give you a set of words, and if you have like a piece of paper or just like a note page on your computer, try to unscramble the words I'm going to present to you, okay? And try not to let the people on the left side see it. Good job. All right, you got them unscrambled? Okay. So now, people on the right side of the room, your left side, close your eyes. And then people on the left side of the room, you can open them. And I'm going to show you a set of words, and you're going to unscramble them on your computers, notebooks, whatever you have. Please don't call them out. I'm asking you. Okay. I don't actually know what the first one is. I have spent all day looking at it, and I try to Google it, and I don't know what it is. But you can do the rest of them. Alright, you got them unscrambled? No? Just trust me. Alright, you guys good? Okay, we're moving on. Alright, so now try to unscramble this one. What? Yeah, if you can open your eyes, try to, all of you unscramble this word. Sorry. What?
First one about the flowers.
Oh, nice. Alright, did you guys have that one unscrambled? Alright, how many of you wrote plate? That was, how many of you wrote pedal? This is the opposite of what we're supposed to have. Well, it kind of works, just not the way we thought. Anyway, so because I showed because I showed this side of the room, this set of words, they were primed to think of kitchen utensils. Yeah.
You showed us that.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, you got it. It worked.
Oh, it did work. Yes, nice. Okay, so because I showed one side of the room kitchen utensils, they were primed to think about kitchen utensils, but you aren't consciously aware of that unless you read the textbook or have been in an experiment like that before. And when I presented the other side of the room, this set of words, they're thinking about plants.
Oh,
Yeah, and you're not consciously aware that I'm making you think about plants. All you see is a bunch of random words that I put up on the screen. And you're probably like, why is this guy making us do this? Alright. So, yeah. So, subliminal messages are kind of fun. Basically, you're presenting like an image or a word, some kind of stimuli to a subject or participant. We call them participants now. And they're not consciously aware of it, but it still changes their behavior in some way. Got a couple of examples of this for you. This is probably a little bit before your time. But see if you can see the message in this video.
And nothing's been done. George Bush had a plan. Add a prescription drug benefit to Medicare.
Every senior will have access to prescription drug benefits.
And Al Gore opposed bipartisan reform. He's pushing a big government plan that lets Washington bureaucrats interfere with what your doctors prescribe. The Gore prescription plan, bureaucrats decide. The Bush prescription plan, seniors choose.
All right, who saw it? I'll play it again for you guys.
Under Clinton Gore, prescription drug prices skyrocketed, and nothing's been done. George Bush had a plan. Add a prescription drug benefit to Medicare.
Every senior will have access to prescription drug benefits.
And Al Gore opposed bipartisan reform. He's pushing a big government plan that lets Washington bureaucrats interfere with what your doctors prescribe. The Gore prescription plan,
Do you see how it focuses on rats first? When it...
wait.
You guys see it? Yeah.
Yes, look.
Alright, this is going to be half speed. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
the Gore prescription plan.
So yeah, advertisers sometimes do this. I think psychology textbooks go pretty far out of their way to find these examples, to be honest. Maybe I just don't know about them, and I do have all Apple products, so. In this example, for gin, there's a subliminal message in the picture. I don't know if you can see it from here, but basically the ice cubes spell out sex. This picture's in your textbook too, if you ever want to like look at it or something, I don't know. That is like a picture from your textbook for fun. I guess it's meant to like make you think that like, okay. In the highball glass. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see from where you guys are sitting. Yeah. What was that?
Can you draw it out with the extra marker?
I'm not gonna draw it out. It's spelled like down the line here. Anyway, the other example I had prepared for you guys is come on. Are you gonna go to my link here? Have you guys ever listened to Backmass Tracks before? Pokemon one, I think I've actually heard the Pokemon one before. If you listen to like Stairway to Heaven, it'll, this is forward. So this is Stairway to Heaven played forward. Alright, and here's it played in reverse. And if you look at the lyrics, it says, "Here's to my sweet Satan." I'll give you guys the Pokemon rap. Alright, here's the Pokemon rap played in reverse now. Here, I'll play it again. Alright, if you guys quiet down, I'll play it again. Alright. Alright, moving on. So, is that better now? Cool. So, these messages don't really affect complex and long-term behavior, but they might give you some associations that you're not consciously aware of. So when you see that gin glass, you think, oh, gin makes you sexy, or if you drink gin, you'll have more sex. That's not true. But, just a disclaimer. But you may be more likely to buy that type of gin if you like see that message out in the wild somewhere. So, your textbook talks about this model, the global workspace model, and it basically says that consciousness is a product of activity in specific brain regions. So brain regions are responsible for specific awareness of information, if that makes sense. There's a diagram coming up that'll make this easier. So the idea is that there's a specific part of your brain that handles visual information, that makes you consciously aware of visual information. There's a specific part of your brain that handles motor movements and makes you consciously aware of your motor movements. Like if you like throw a ball or swing a bat or throw a football, you'd be aware of that through the motor cortex. You guys good?
Can you put the PowerPoint on top hat so we can copy it on our phone?
I will have Dr. Simons Rudolph do that. I don't have access to Top Hat for the class. Are we good? Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for a lot of decision making, a lot of complex thoughts, emotions. So if you make plans with a friend, your prefrontal cortex makes the activity in the prefrontal cortex makes you aware that you have plans with your friend. Your motor cortex makes you aware of movement, like I said. Parietal lobe is spatial awareness. It makes you aware of where things are. The occipital lobe is for visual information, and the temporal lobe is auditory information. So each activity in each of these specific areas makes you aware of information in that specific realm, if that makes sense. Good? All right. Does anyone have any questions about that? I heard groans. Anyone? Yeah.
What happens if you take some sort of mind-altering drug? Would anything happen to how these brains?
So mind-altering drugs actually can cause different patterns of activity in the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe. If you take a dose of LSD or something, you're going to have patterns of activity in your occipital lobe because you're going to probably have visual hallucinations. You may have auditory hallucinations. So these brain areas would actually light up. Even if you were placed in a dark, soundproof room with no light or sound whatsoever, you would still have activity in these because they're not being active. Even though they're not being activated by stimuli from the environment, they're being activated by the psychoactive effects of that drug. Does that make sense?
Yeah, psychologists allowed to like experiment like with drugs that are illegal and stuff to figure out what's going on.
That's a good question. Psychology has done some experimentation with microdosing LSD for PTSD sufferers, like veterans and stuff, and it's shown to have promising results. You really can't do that kind of experiment with controlled substances, though, for the most part, due to laws and IRBs. Yeah.
What's that big unlabeled part, dude?
This part? Oh wait. You know, it's late in the afternoon for me too. This one, yeah. There's a few on it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's some cortex activities in there that do like face recognition. A lot of the inner brain parts are kind of centered around that area too, like the middle brain. Yeah.
So going back to like just the drug thing was like, so you're saying like both externally, but like for example the temporal lobe, like both a substance and an external environment, they could both stimulate that lobe?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it says I'm aware of space. I know you're probably doing it, but I was writing it down. Is that talking about personal space or at like a space that I'm in, like physically?
Both. So I do a lot of work in spatial cognition and how we interpret objects in space. And you can talk about egocentric space, so like the amount of space that you occupy and where you are in relation to other things. Or you can talk about allocentric space, when that is space that, like, if I was going to ask you, like, how far do you think it is from that board to that wall, that'd be an allocentric question because I'm asking you where that board is in relation to that wall. And it's not related to your position at all.
So my brother actually has autism. He has like a really big problem with like personal space with other people. Is like autism and other like kind of mental disabilities, does it affect like, your parietal lobe?
I would assume that it does. I don't really know a lot about the physiological effects of autism, but I would venture a guess that it does. Anyone else? Yeah.
Do scientists use a lot of VR experiences to study stuff like this now, or would that affect the brain differently?
You can use VR to study brain activity. It becomes difficult though because if you're talking about measuring brain activity, you need pretty heavy equipment. An EEG machine has an electrode mesh that goes over the skull, and it has issues associated with it. An MRI machine is like a $30 million piece of machinery that you have to put someone inside of for hours on end. You can do it, it just becomes very complicated in how you approach the problem.
And don't those also emit radiation?
They do, but it's safe. Actually, an MRI uses magnets to image the brain. An EEG it just measures the electrical activity. Positron emission tomography uses a radioactive isotope to measure brain activity. Anyone else? Yeah.
So with, going back to drugs for a second, so with the effects of hallucinogens or acid and like stuff like that, would you say that that heightens those like in a false way, or how does that work with occipital and temporal lobe?
So when you're looking at something, your occipital lobe is active because you're taking in light information through your eyes that's being translated into electrical activity in the occipital lobe.
Right.
When you take a hallucinogenic drug that causes visual hallucinations, your brain basically thinks that it's taking in light information in some way, but you're not actually taking any other light information than what's in your environment already. The drug is basically causing increased activity in the occipital lobe, and then your brain processes back out to where your eyes, to your eyes, and that's how you interpret a hallucination, basically. Yep. So moving on. So split brain is a pretty interesting phenomenon that happens in psychology. Basically what happens is that the corpus callosum, which is the connection between your left and right hemisphere, is severed. So you have the left brain doing its own thing and the right brain doing its own thing, and they're not communicating at all at this point. This is done normally because for epilepsy. It can mitigate the symptoms of epilepsy or remove it completely. But it does provide a really unique case study opportunity for psychologists to see what exactly it is the left brain does versus what exactly it is the right brain does. So this is the human brain. This right here is the corpus callosum. And here is an intact corpus callosum that this person has a full brain. Both sides are communicating with each other. This person has the corpus callosum severed, so neither of their hemispheres are communicating with the other one. What is that? We're going to talk about it. Yeah.
You mean severed? Is that
It's surgically severed.
just like untouched?
Yeah. Yeah. What was that?
Can you like go back to slide for a second?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the corpus callosum is basically an information highway between the two hemispheres of the brain. The left brain handles certain tasks that the right brain doesn't, and the right brain handles certain tasks the left brain doesn't. Yeah.
So when they cut they sever the corpus callosum, can the person consciously choose which hemisphere to use?
So both hemispheres are active. They're still using their entire brain. They just basically have two halves of a brain that aren't talking to each other. And it's going to be weird, but I'll explain it in a little bit. I promise. Are you good? Okay. So, like I said, a normal functioning brain with a corpus callosum intact has that information highway between the two hemispheres. So both hemispheres are communicating, and we function normally. In split brain patients, they can't perform certain tasks the same way that we can. Because there's no communication between those two halves of the brain. And it gets wonky here. So basically, the left visual field, so if you were to close your right eye, that's your left visual field. That's all of the visual information your left eye is taking in. That's handled by the right side of your brain. If you close your left eye, and that's your right visual field, that's handled by the left side of your brain. The left side of your brain is better at language. It processes right visual field information. It also controls the right side of your body's motor movements. The right hemisphere controls your spatial relationship perception, and it processes the left side of your body. So it processes the left visual field, and it processes the left side of your body's motor movements. So left controls right, right controls left. Got that? Okay. Any questions? Okay. So, class activity. Let's figure out how a split brain person would handle these two tasks. Just turn to your neighbor, talk for 5 minutes, then we'll reconvene and talk about it. It's a part of it, yeah. Like 2 more minutes here.
It's like flashing. So if you're seeing something it's like a task. It's like so you see something in politics, it's like they do grab but they wouldn't So anything on the left side, the big little tree.
We'll end up talking about it in a second.
Yeah. Okay. It's very nice.
I mean, they have a hard time. I actually don't really know. I'm not sure if the ears follow the same pattern as the eyes. They wouldn't be able to try to sound. They'd probably just use like Okay, 5 minutes have passed. Who wants to venture a guess at how someone with split brain would handle a photo of a family member presented in the right visual field?
So if it's on the right visual field, they'll be able to talk about it and like use words to describe how the picture makes them feel, right?
Yeah. Anyone want to tell me how they would handle a hammer? Yeah.
I would be able to see the hammer, but I wouldn't be able to talk about it, but I would be able to grab it with my left hand if it was placed behind like something.
Yes. So, if a photo of a family member was presented in the right visual field, then someone with a split brain would be able to describe it, and they wouldn't really be able to describe where the person was because it's a spatial thing. But they'd be able to identify, they'd be able to identify the person, they'd be able to describe the scenery around them. Yeah. If a hammer is presented in the left visual field, the person can grab it, but they can't talk about it. They don't have the language to process that it's a hammer. Does that make sense? We're gonna dive a little bit deeper in here. So, when a person with a split brain is asked what they see in the left thing here, the left hemisphere processes that the fork on the right side of the screen is a fork, and they can tell you that it's a fork, right? But if you flash a spoon on the left side of the screen, the person can tell you that it's on the left side of the screen, but they can't tell you that it's a spoon. If that makes sense. They can also pick up the spoon when they have to grab it. Yeah?
So, like, you said that that little, what was it called, corpus callosum, that it can be like severed, can it be like repaired?
That's a good question. I have to look it up for you. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone having their corpus callosum repaired, though. I don't think it's possible. Anyone else? Okay. So it's kind of wonky. So for a photo presented in the right visual field, a person with a split brain could verbally name who's in the photo, and they can pick up the photo with their right hand. Just to give you the answers to the other. Yeah.
Can you only use it with one hand?
So because the left hemisphere of your brain is controlling the right side's visual field, it's processing the right side's visual field, and it's handling the right side's motor movements. If it's presented in the left visual field, then the brain can translate that to the motor movements of the right side of your body. So it can still pick up the object, but only if it's presented in the left, like the left hemisphere, or presented in the right visual field. That's when the left hemisphere takes over.
So if you had two different things on each visual field, you like two separate tasks?
Yeah, I think they would have issues with that. There's a thing in human factors called intentional resources and workload, and if you give someone like two simultaneous tasks, then you're going to have performance impacts on either one. So they might not be able to perform either one well, but theoretically, I guess they could. Yeah.
So if an object was presented to them in both hemispheres, how would that person respond to it if both hemispheres are aware of the object?
Then their brain would function basically normally. Yeah.
So the only time it kind of affects them is if it's like strictly off one side.
Yeah, so they did this kind of experiment to isolate the functions of each hemisphere of the brain. So when you control the right, or you block out the right visual field, you're isolating the left visual field, and you're also isolating the information processing in the right hemisphere of the brain because the left hemisphere isn't active at that point. If you do it the other way around, you're isolating the right hemisphere, and so you can look at how they perform the task, and then you can make certain assumptions about how each hemisphere is functioning and handling information. Yeah.
Would they just have like them cover their eye or something? Like how would they like contain it to the?
You can just wear an eye patch. You just cover their eyes somehow. It's
Let's say if a person is half blind, does that mean like he can only use
Well, I guess if they're half blind, you'd have to account for that. I mean, I'm assuming that whoever was in this case study was 20/20 vision in both eyes. Yeah.
Did they like look the corpus out from just like severed by accident? Because I feel like this is the other thing you make.
They would not do this. They would not take a participant and sever their corpus callosum. They would have taken someone who already had it severed due to some other medical condition. Yeah. We're not monsters. Yeah.
Whatever it is, I got college to pay for.
What was that?
I got college to pay for, so like, how much would they pay you for something?
They wouldn't do that due to ethics. If you had a severe case of epilepsy, then they would consider doing it as a medical treatment, and then you'd be considered for a study like this, but I wouldn't go out of your way for it. Pro tip. Alright. So for the hammer, if the hammer is in the left visual field, then the person can't verbally name the hammer. They can't tell you that it's a hammer, but they can pick up the hammer with the left hand, because the right hemisphere does not process language. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So, because the left hemisphere is responsible for language, when you have a normally functioning corpus callosum or an intact corpus callosum, it can interpret what the right hemisphere is doing, and that's why your brain kind of functions the way it does. The left hemisphere is taking the functioning of the right hemisphere and then translating that so that you can verbalize whatever it is you're doing. So if this person had a fully functioning corpus, what was that? Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to show the example. If that person has a fully functioning corpus callosum, then the left hemisphere translates what the right hemisphere is doing and says, oh, the right hemisphere sees a hammer, that's a hammer, I'm going to pick up the hammer. It can verbalize and translate whatever the right hemisphere is doing, and that's why it's called the interpreter. Does that make sense? Alright, so another example of this, a person with split brain watches different images flash simultaneously on the left and right sides of a screen, and then they're presented with a row of options, image options, and then they're asked to point each hand at the bottom image that is most related to the image flashed on that side of the screen. So the left hemisphere would point the right hand at the chicken head. Wait, hold on. Get mixed up here. The left hemisphere points the right hand at the chicken head because the chicken head is most closely related to the chicken foot, obviously. The right hemisphere would point to the snow shovel, but the left hemisphere decides that the snow shovel is actually used to clean up chicken coops. Because the left hemisphere is taking this information here and it's processing it because it's related to the chicken foot, right? But because the right hemisphere sees that house, it can't verbalize that it's a house. So basically, the right hemisphere points to the shovel because the shovel is related to cleaning up snow, but the left hemisphere is saying, yeah, but that shovel is actually for the chicken because I don't know what's going on with the left side of the screen here, right? Does that make sense? I realize this is kind of confusing. So basically, anyway, so the left hemisphere sees the chicken foot, so it interprets the chicken foot, it knows the chicken foot, so it points the right hand at the chicken, right? The right hemisphere sees the house with snow, but it can't verbalize that it's a house with snow. It doesn't have object recognition. So the right hemisphere points the left hand to the shovel because the shovel is most closely related to the house with the snow. But because the right hemisphere doesn't process language, the left hemisphere basically takes this information, basically sees that the left hand, or the the left hemisphere basically like justifies it for the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere makes up an excuse for the shovel for the right hemisphere. So it's saying you pick that shovel because the chicken coop needs to be cleaned, and you use a shovel to clean a chicken coop, as opposed to if the right hemisphere was working properly, or they were both, the whole brain was working properly, the right hemisphere would say, oh, I picked the shovel because you use a shovel to clean up snow.
So can the left hemisphere see, can like they both see bottom pictures, but only each see the top one?
I would assume that in this experiment that they are able to see both images at the same time. You're not isolating a visual field in this case. If you kind of like close one eye and like, you know, the image kind of shifts to the left or right, each eye processes information a little bit differently. So things in one eye are a little bit different than the other eye, and that's how you get this kind of disparity in the responses. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Well, like in the like a real life situation, like there are usually some kind of people like they can say it right the problem, but something like they have in their mind everything, but they just cannot speak it out. Is that more like the left or right dominant brain hemisphere?
That's a different thing called tip of the tongue phenomenon, and that's due to a retrieval error in memory. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So yeah, the chicken foot example, the participant's left hemisphere was interpreting what the right hemisphere was doing. Even though the right hemisphere is not communicating with the left hemisphere can still interpret what the right hemisphere is doing. So participants, they chose a shovel because you clean a chicken coop with a shovel, even though they are presented with the snowy house. Another thing that's pretty heavily related to consciousness is sleep. I probably don't get enough of it. You probably don't get enough of it. 8 hours. That's the ideal number. People commonly think that the brain shuts itself down when we sleep. The reality is it doesn't really. In fact, some regions of the brain are actually more active and more asleep than when we are awake, which is kind of weird. So the part that our sleep is regulated, our like wake-sleep cycles are regulated by what's called a circadian rhythm. And basically it's a natural biological cycle that puts us into like a daily pattern. So you probably go to bed at like midnight, 1 a.m., you wake up at 7, 8 a.m., and then you get about your day, do your whole thing, and you go back to sleep again. This circadian rhythm kind of comes about because changes in like the ambient light of the environment register through basically your eyes take in light, and then the ambient light kind of registers in this place called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. It's in the hypothalamus, kind of really small part, and then that activity in the suprachiasmatic nuclei activates the production of melatonin, which is what starts to make you feel sleepy. And I got a nice little video to kind of illustrate this. I wish that this stupid thing would hold. Okay.
How do you know when it's time to sleep and time to wake up in the morning? More powerful than any alarm clock are your own circadian rhythms. 24-hour cycles of biological processes that exist in every living thing. They keep your body functioning on schedule, day and night, wherever you are. And the key to it all is a bunch of cells in the retina of the eye called photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Whilst the eye's rod and cone cells are responsible for vision, these retinal ganglion cells detect the brightness of our surroundings and send that information through the optic nerve to the suprachiasmatic nuclei, the brain's master clock. The master clock coordinates all the tiny clocks that govern the behaviour of the cells throughout the body. Taking light as its cue, the master clock determines a continuous cycle of physiological changes within our cells, including the production of hormones that prepare our bodies for waking and sleeping hours. Experiments show that when a person is kept entirely in the dark, their circadian rhythm hardly alters, keeping more or less to a 24-hour day.
But seeing too much or too little light, or receiving light at the wrong times of day, can leave the master clock confused as to the time of day. This upsets the rhythm of our cells and impacts on our health and well-being. It's a real problem for people who work at night, those with sleep disorders, and also those with certain visual impairments that prevent light reaching those light-detecting ganglion cells. Studies have shown that disruptions to our natural rhythms put an extraordinary strain on the body, increasing the risk of a number of serious diseases, including cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and depression. It can also impair your ability to think, which is why, here at Oxford, we are researching whether delaying the start of the school day by an hour or two to better suit the body clock of the average teenager could improve their exam results. Anyone following? You may not be able to hear it ticking, but you can certainly feel your body clock at work. To learn more about the science of sleep and circadian rhythms, visit www.oxfordsparks.oh.ac.uk.
So that's essentially how circadian rhythms work. The experiment they mentioned where they put people in complete darkness, they basically had a guy sit in a cave for a few days and they wanted to see how it affected his natural body clock, his circadian rhythm. And he did actually, without any kind of daylight or anything, he did actually kind of resort to a 24-hour clock, which is kind of interesting. Any questions so far?
So they found that if they keep the light consistent, the body will develop a rhythm, but it sounded like when the lights are changing all the time, it sounds like that kind of screws people up.
Yeah, so one example of this is, you ever use your phone at night in the dark, and if you have an iPhone, it starts turning like an orange tint. So there's actually a lot of research that suggests that that kind of tint can help improve the ability to go to sleep faster. When you are bombarded with that bright white light that the screen normally has, it can actually affect your retinal ganglion cells and prevent you from getting to sleep in an easy way. So if you haven't already, you should all install Flux on your computers and use it because it's great. Flux, F-L-U-X. I have it on all of my computers, and I haven't regretted it ever since. It tints your screen orange to help. It basically reduces the amount of white light your eyes are getting, and it'll help you get to sleep a little bit faster. Melatonin is the hormone of sleep. It's released into the brain, and it's what causes you to feel sleepy. Some people take melatonin to make themselves feel sleepy or go to sleep. And it gets produced as the bright light in the ambient environment produces. So if you ever feel sleepy as the sun's going down, that's because your body is starting to produce melatonin because the amount of ambient light is reducing in the environment. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus is right here in the hypothalamus, which is right here in the brain. It's a very small part of the brain. It's really close to the pineal gland. When the suprachiasmatic nucleus activates, it causes the pineal gland to release the melatonin into your system, and then you start feeling sleepy. Any questions so far? Cool. So when we do start to go to sleep, there are multiple stages that we go through to get to restful sleep. And we have been able to map those out using electroencephalography, EEG. That's what I mentioned earlier, that you put the electrode mesh over people's heads, and you can measure the electrical activity in their brain. So this is on no kind of scale or whatsoever. This is basically what the waveforms look like for brain activity at each stage of sleep. So if you notice that alert wakefulness is pretty consistent, pretty fast, low amplitude waves. Just before sleep, you can see the amplitude. That's the height of the wave. If you guys were wondering about that, you can see at the height of the waves kind of expands a little bit. The waves kind of expand too. The wavelengths expand a little bit. And that kind of continues into stage 1 with the theta waves. Any questions so far? Just holler. So in the theta waves, amplitude is expanding a little bit, the wavelength is expanding a little bit. At stage 2, it's similar to the theta waves, but you start getting this waveform called a K complex. People in neuroscience like to name their wave patterns. So this spike followed by a dip is called a K complex. It's the name of that specific wave pattern. And then that's the start of slow wave sleep, which is you have pretty high amplitudes, you have pretty long wavelengths relatively, and this is the delta wave sleep. And then once you kind of get past this is like you're passed out at this point. You're fast asleep. At stage 1, you're kind of nodding off, you're a little bit tired, your eyes are closed, but you're not quite asleep yet. It's like when you take a nap for 30 minutes, you never actually fall asleep, you're just kind of sitting there with your eyes closed, deeply relaxed. And once you get past like delta waves, you get to REM sleep. Anyone know what REM stands for? Rapid eye movement. It's also the name of a great 90s band. And the REM waveforms are actually similar to when we're awake. It's beta wave pattern. So, does anyone know why? The back?
We're dreaming.
Yeah, because we're dreaming. Dreaming is just like being awake in terms of brain activity. Yeah.
I took a nap today. I had to dream. Like, does that mean that like I was in REM? Or like, because it was like a
Probably.
nap. So like you can't like go like into like REM even if you only sleep like 50 minutes.
The time it takes to get to REM kind of depends on a lot of different things. It can depend on your circadian rhythm. It can depend on how sleep deprived you are from the night before. Like there are instances where your body is so starved for deep, restful sleep that it'll just knock you right out the chance you get to sleep and put you into REM. Because REM is where we relax and kind of restore our bodies. It's also how we encode our memories for the day. It's been associated with that. I just went through all this. So stage 1, that's when you're drifting off. It's probably how you're feeling right now at 4:03 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And you would probably, if I put an EEG on you, you would have the theta waves, or the alpha wave, theta waves. Stage 2, your breathing will become more regular. You are less sensitive to external stimulation. Someone would probably have to shake you a little bit to wake you up. And that's where you start seeing the K complexes, so these bursts of activity in the waveform. Slow wave sleep, stages 3 and 4, that's the delta waves, the long, expansive waves. This is where you probably need to shake someone a lot to get them awake, maybe slap them a little bit. Don't do that actually. Or like dump a cold bucket of water on them. And that's, REM sleep is, it looks similar to being awake. There's rapid eye movements. If you look at someone who's in REM sleep, their eyes are darting back and forth very fast. It's kind of creepy to look at actually. Your motor system shuts down. This is so that you don't act out your dreams. Yeah.
So I was having a dream the other night, and I had a picture framed on my wall, and I remember in the dream taking it and ripping it off the wall. Whoa. So I've never had like sleepwalking or anything like that, but I remember in my dream for some reason, and I woke up and it was in my hands.
That's weird.
So, what is that?
You might have sleepwalked a little bit.
I was like, what?
Yeah. Sleepwalking basically means that your motor system isn't shut down when you're asleep. You're asleep, but your motor system isn't turned off. So people get up and walk around, do weird things. Yeah, you have a question?
It's kind of like that.
Sleep talk? It's the same deal. Talking is a motor movement. And if your motor system's not shut down, you might end up talking in your sleep. My younger brother talks in his sleep sometimes. Was he responding to you? I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. You're not asleep if you do that. You guys quiet down a little bit. So if you get injured and you pass out, your body is not asleep. You're in a different state of unconsciousness. Yeah.
When we wake up, do we go from stage 4, 3, 2, 1?
Yes. So when you fall asleep for the night and you have a full set of cycles, basically, you start being consciously awake and you'll move down to stage 1, 2, slow wave sleep. Then you'll hit REM for, you actually don't engage in REM sleep for very long per time. Maybe like 30 minutes to an hour-ish, not even. And you'll do that 4 or 5 times in a night, depending on how long you're sleeping. So yeah, to answer your question, you do go through a cycle as you sleep. Yeah.
So why is sleep, like why do sometimes you feel like you go to sleep and wake up like 3 minutes later? Like why does that go
I don't really know the answer to that question. I think it just has to do with people's subjective experience, how tired they are. You know, a lot of things can happen there. Yeah.
So in terms of the determined, there are some people only sleep like 2 hours or 1 hour a day, but they just stay at REM the whole time, or they go to sleep. They just force themselves.
I have not heard about that. Yeah, good question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So, just a quick questions to recap so you guys understand. Andrea has just truly fallen all the way asleep during a nap when her roommate wakes her up to go to their geology exam. Andrea wakes up quickly and easily. Based on this, Andrea was most likely in what stage of sleep? Anyone know? In the back? Stage 2, actually. Because she had just truly fallen asleep. She's fully asleep. If you're in stage 1, you're not quite asleep. You're mostly there, but you're not quite there. All right, next question. Dylan has a newborn baby and spends a lot of the night awake with her, so he is sleep deprived. At work, Dylan was drowsy when sitting at his desk and his eyes started rolling back and his arm twitched. Dylan's experience is best explained by what? Anyone know? Yeah. No.
Stage 1.
Stage 1, yes. He's nodding off. So K complex doesn't actually mention this question. He's just the word nodding off. Alright. Hey, well, I'm not done yet. I got 6 more minutes here. Sorry guys. So dreams are the products of basically consciousness during sleep. You're kind of going through what kind of feels like real images, real experiences, but you're still asleep and they're not actually real. On average, people spend about 6 years of their life dreaming. And dreams can be weird. Like you can wake up and feel like the dream was completely real, that it actually happened. I've had that. Dreams can be completely insane. I've woken up from a dream where I thought all of the water on the earth like ejected into space. And it was really real in a really weird way. There's a difference between dreams and REM sleep and dreams and non-REM sleep, so it's slow wave sleep. REM dreams are going to be more bizarre and weird and not probably possible. And then non-REM dreams will feel like normal everyday life. So like the picture thing, that would be probably a non-REM sleep because it's like in your room and it's real. So when you are dreaming, you can see activity in the motor cortex, the visual association areas, the amygdala. Oh my god.
That's a song, man.
Alright, I'll just call it there.